Berlin, April 24, 1945, 4:40 p.m. 15-year-old Klaus Becker presses against a pile of rubble, clutching a Panzerfaust in his trembling hands. 3 days without food. An American tank has stopped 30 meters from him. The turret slowly rotates, the gun barrel pointing directly at the boy. Klaus knows he's about to die. But he's ready. He's been taught that death in battle is an honor. The tank freezes. Instead of a shot, a voice rings out in broken German, "Come out. Drop your weapon. We won't shoot." Klaus doesn't believe it. It's a trap. They're luring him out to shoot him later, or worse. The SS officer said, "Americans are especially cruel with child soldiers. They consider them fanatics and kill them without trial. But there's no alternative. The Panzerfaust is designed for one shot. If he misses, the tank will simply crush him." Klaus slowly rises, dropping the anti-tank weapon. His legs buckle from weakness and fear. 3 American soldiers emerge from behind the tank. One of them is black. Propaganda said black soldiers were especially brutal. Klaus closes his eyes, expecting a bullet. Friends, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like. Let's continue. Volkssturm, the Third Reich's final gamble. By the end of 1944, the situation for Nazi Germany had become catastrophic. The Red Army was advancing from the east, Americans and British from the west. The professional Wehrmacht had been bled white by years of war of attrition. Divisions that numbered 15,000–17,000 men in 1941 had shrunk to 3,000 to 5,000 by 1945. Reserves were exhausted. Experienced soldiers had died or been captured. Only 2 sources of reinforcement remained: old men and children. On September 25, 1944, Hitler issued a decree creating the Volkssturm, a people's militia. All men aged 16 to 60 not engaged in war industry or serving in the regular army were subject to conscription. In practice, this meant mobilizing teenagers and old men, those previously considered unfit for military service. In total, about 6 million people were drafted into the Volkssturm. Of these, approximately 1 million actually participated in combat operations. The rest were listed as reserves, performed auxiliary functions, or simply didn't report to draft centers. But even that million presented a horrific spectacle: gray-haired old men and beardless boys armed with obsolete rifles from World War I or primitive Panzerfausts, thrown against tanks and professional Allied soldiers. Among these soldiers, members of the Hitler Youth, the Nazi youth organization, formed a special group. By 1945, about 8 million teenagers aged 10 to 18 were in its ranks. They had undergone years of ideological indoctrination, been taught to handle weapons, imbued with fanatical devotion to the Fuhrer and racial hatred. These children became the dying regime's last reserve. The machinery of ideological indoctrination. To understand what was happening in the heads of children like Klaus Becker, you need to understand the system that created them. The Hitler Youth wasn't just a youth organization, it was a machine for producing fanatics, operating with German thoroughness and efficiency. Boys joined the Hitler Youth at 10, in the so-called Jungvolk, the junior division. Military training began even at this stage, disguised as games and sports. They learned to march, read maps, navigate terrain. But ideological education was paramount. Children were instilled with several key ideas. First, Germans are the master race, called to rule over other peoples. Slavs, Jews, Gypsies are subhumans who must either be enslaved or exterminated. Second, the Fuhrer is infallible. He was sent by fate itself to restore Germany's greatness. Obedience to him is not just duty, it's the sacred obligation of every German. Third, death for the Fuhrer and homeland is the greatest honor a person can achieve. Cowardice, surrender, doubt, these are betrayals of everything that makes a person German. Fourth, Germany's enemies aren't just soldiers of enemy armies, they're subhumans, monsters who know no mercy. This especially applied to Russians and Americans. Propaganda portrayed Soviet soldiers as wild Asian hordes torturing German women and killing children. Americans were presented as cruel capitalists fighting for money who didn't care about human life. By 14, boys moved into the Hitler Youth proper, where training became overtly military. They studied firearms, learned to handle grenades, mastered close combat tactics. By 16, many had military training better than recruit soldiers in other armies. But the most terrible thing was the psychological programming. These children were taught not to think but to obey, not to doubt but to believe, not to fear death but to seek it as the highest goal. Hermann Schulz, another surviving Volkssturm member, recalled, "We sincerely believed that dying for Germany was beautiful. We envied those who died in battle because they had achieved the greatest honor." The propaganda of fear. In the war's final months, as defeat became increasingly obvious, Nazi propaganda shifted from promises of victory to threats of what would happen in case of defeat. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry launched a fear campaign aimed at forcing Germans to fight to the last, not from belief in victory, but from terror of what would happen if they surrendered. Posters depicted American and British soldiers as monsters with bloody fangs. Newspapers published stories about Allied atrocities. Supposedly they raped German women, tortured prisoners, shot children. Special emphasis was placed on what would happen to Hitler Youth and Volkssturm members if captured. Americans don't take child soldiers prisoner, SS officers told the young charges. To them, you're not children, you're fanatics, Nazis who must be destroyed. If they capture you alive, they'll torture you to make you betray your comrades, then hang you. Better to die in battle with weapon in hand than on the gallows. These stories weren't entirely fabricated. The Nazis skillfully used isolated incidents of cruelty that actually occurred. War is hell, and in any army there are those who commit war crimes. But they made the rule from exceptions, a system from isolated cases. The result was that German children feared capture more than death. Klaus Becker recalled, "When I saw the American tank, I thought only one thing: I won't let them take me alive. I knew what awaited me if I surrendered. Torture, humiliation, agonizing death. Better to die immediately, in battle, as befits a German soldier." The reality of the final days. By April 1945, the situation in Berlin was apocalyptic. The city lay in ruins after months of bombing. Soviet troops were fighting in the capital's streets, American and British armies rapidly advancing from the west. But Hitler continued demanding resistance to the last man, to the last bullet. Volkssturm units, including teenagers like Klaus, were thrown to defend cities. Their training took several days and amounted to showing them how to load a Panzerfaust and where to aim to hit a tank. They were issued rifles, a few grenades, single-use anti-tank weapons. Then they were distributed to positions and left to wait for the enemy. Klaus described his unit. "There were 12 of us boys, the youngest was 13, the oldest 16. 3 more old men over 60. One SS officer who was supposed to command us disappeared the first night. We were left alone, with weapons in hand, without food, without understanding what to do. We sat in the basement of a destroyed house and listened as gunfire and explosions grew closer." These children had neither experience nor training for real combat. They could shoot at targets but had never seen a person die from a bullet. They knew tactical theory but had no idea about the reality of modern war. Some had never held combat weapons until they were shoved into their hands the day before battle. But fear of the enemy was so strong that many were actually prepared to fight to the death. Hermann Schultz recalled, "We made an oath to each other, none of us would surrender alive. If necessary, we'd blow ourselves up with grenades rather than let the Americans take us prisoner." Encounter with reality. When the American tank stopped opposite Klaus's position, the boy was certain the next few seconds would be his last. He aimed the Panzerfaust, but his hands trembled so badly he wasn't sure he could hit. Part of him wanted to shoot immediately, end it. Another part was paralyzed with terror. And then a voice rang out. Not a roar, not a threat, but a calm, almost friendly voice in bad German. "Hey, kid. Drop that shit and come out. We're not going to kill you. Come out with your hands up and everything will be fine." Klaus didn't believe it. It was a trick. They'd make him come out, then shoot him. Or take him alive and start torturing. The SS officer warned about such tricks. But the tank just stood there. Didn't shoot. The turret even turned slightly aside, as if showing absence of hostile intent. And the voice repeated, this time with a note of impatience, "Come on, kid. We don't have all day. Come out and nobody will touch you." Klaus had no choice. The Panzerfaust was designed for one shot. If he shot and missed, the tank would crush him. If he didn't shoot, maybe, just maybe, some chance to survive. Slowly, expecting a bullet any second, Klaus dropped the anti-tank weapon, raised his hands, and came out of cover. 3 American soldiers appeared from behind the tank. One was black, and Klaus froze for a moment. Propaganda especially frightened German children with black soldiers, portraying them as savages and rapists. But the soldier simply smiled, showing white teeth, and extended a canteen to Klaus. "Here, have a drink. You look like you haven't had water in 3 days." Klaus couldn't move. He stood with raised hands, expecting anything, a blow, a shot, mockery. But not this, not kindness, not mercy from an enemy who was supposed to be a monster. The American gently lowered the boy's hands, placed the canteen in his palms. "Go ahead, drink. It's just water, not poison." The voice was calm, even warm, like a father talking to a frightened child. Klaus drank, and tears streamed down his face. Everything he'd believed for the last years was crumbling in these seconds. Americans weren't monsters. They were just people, exhausted by war, tired, but still capable of humanity. The American dilemma: how to fight children. For American soldiers, encountering child soldiers became one of the war's hardest trials. They came to Europe to fight Nazis, the professional German army, the SS, adults who consciously chose the side of evil. But nobody prepared them for having to fight children. Private Tom Maguire of the 3rd Infantry Division described an episode that haunted him for decades. We were clearing a village west of Berlin. Suddenly fire opened from a building window. We responded with everything we had: automatic weapons, grenades. When we burst inside, there were 5 children. 2 dead, 3 wounded. The oldest was maybe 15. They had rifles and Hitler Youth uniforms. They fought like soldiers, but when they surrendered, when I saw their faces, my God, they were just scared kids. I still see them in my dreams. American military leaders faced an unprecedented moral dilemma. On one hand, these children posed a real threat. They were armed, trained, ideologically indoctrinated, and ready to kill. A Panzerfaust in a 14-year-old boy's hands could destroy a tank as effectively as in an adult soldier's hands. A grenade thrown by a teenager killed just as surely. On the other hand, these were children. Killing children violated all norms of civilized warfare, all moral principles on which the American army was raised. Moreover, many American soldiers were fathers themselves. They fought, as they believed, to protect their children from Nazism. And now they had to kill other people's children who had become victims of that same ideology. There were no official orders on how to deal with child soldiers. Decisions were made at the level of individual commanders, individual units, individual soldiers. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, Americans chose mercy. The practice that was then tacitly approved by command looked like this: do everything possible to make children surrender without killing them. This meant risk for their own soldiers, it meant spending more time and ammunition, it meant violating tactical rules. But Americans did it. Private Eugene Henderson recalled, when we encountered a position where we suspected there were children, we tried to act differently. We didn't just bombard it with grenades or call in artillery. We tried to talk. Those who could yelled in German for them to surrender. Gave them more time. Shot warning shots, not to kill. Of course, it was dangerous for us. Every extra second is a chance to get a bullet. But I don't know if I could live with myself if I killed a child. When children surrendered, their treatment was completely different from adult prisoners. They immediately received medical care, priority care, even before wounded Americans in some cases. They were given food, water, blankets. They were quickly sent to the rear, away from the front line. Captain James Wilson, a medical service officer, recalled, they brought us a group of prisoners, about 20 teenagers from the Volkssturm. Half were wounded, all were exhausted, scared to death. One boy, he was probably 14, was crying and repeating, "Please don't kill me." Our medics worked with them all night. We treated them the same way we'd treat American children. When they realized we weren't going to torture or kill them, when we fed them and gave them a safe place to sleep. You should have seen their faces. It was like they woke from a nightmare. Captured child soldiers were sent to POW camps, but the detention was organized differently than for adults. American command took special measures for underage prisoners. First, they were kept separate from adult prisoners when possible, especially from ardent Nazis who might continue ideological indoctrination. Second, they received improved rations. Children got additional milk, vitamins, calories. American dietitians calculated special nutrition for teenagers that should help them recover from malnutrition. Third, educational programs were organized for them. This was part of denazification policy, an attempt to re-educate young Germans, show them the truth about Nazism and the regime's crimes. But this was done not through violence or brainwashing, but through education and discussion. Chaplain Robert Jenkins, serving in one such camp, recalled, "My job was to help these children understand what happened to them. That they were used, deceived, turned into weapons by a regime that didn't care about their lives. It wasn't easy. Many were still convinced Nazis, believed in racial superiority, hated the Allies. But slowly, as they saw we treated them humanely, that we weren't the monsters propaganda described, they began to doubt. Doubt was the first step toward healing. The results of this policy were astounding. The survival rate among captured child soldiers was over 95%, much higher than among adult German POWs. Most received necessary medical care, including complex surgical operations. After processing, 95% were returned to their families or turned over to social services. But mercy had a price, and American soldiers paid it. Attempts to capture child soldiers alive instead of simply killing them meant increased risk. And sometimes that risk led to American deaths. Sergeant Robert Mitchell, age 50. In April 1945, his squad encountered a group of German teenagers dug into a destroyed building. Instead of simply destroying the position, Mitchell tried to make them surrender. He spent almost 20 minutes negotiating, shouting in German, promising safety. Eventually the children began coming out. But the last one, a boy about 15, suddenly threw a grenade. It killed one American soldier and wounded 2 others. The boy was shot on the spot. I wonder, Mitchell said decades later, was it worth it? Was it worth trying to save those German children if it cost my comrade's life, a good American guy who had a wife and daughter at home? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I also don't know if I could have lived with myself if I just ordered them all destroyed. War forces us to make impossible choices, and there's no right answer. For many American veterans, encountering child soldiers became a psychological trauma that haunted them their entire remaining lives. Chaplains reported a sharp increase in counseling requests after encounters with child soldiers. Soldiers wrote home letters full of moral confusion. Dear Mary, Private Charles Thompson wrote to his wife in May 1945, "Today I did something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. We came under fire from a building. I threw a grenade through the window. When the explosion subsided, I heard a child crying. It turned out there were children there, German children in military uniforms with weapons. 2 died. I killed children, Mary. I know I had no choice, that they shot at us first, that they were soldiers, not innocent children. But when I close my eyes, I see their faces. I don't know how to live with this." But there were other letters. Letters from soldiers who were able to spare children. Today, Private Eugene Henderson wrote, "Something amazing happened. We captured a group of German child soldiers. They were so frightened they thought we'd kill them. But we gave them food, water, medical care. And one boy, I can't forget his face, looked at me and asked, 'Why?' I answered as best I could, 'Because you're children. Because the war isn't your fault. Because we're human.' I think for the first time in his life he understood that Americans aren't monsters. Maybe such moments are exactly why we fight. Not to kill, but to free people from lies. Spring 1945. A small German town somewhere in Bavaria had just come under American control. In the square in front of the half-destroyed town hall stands a group of German teenagers, 20, maybe 30 people. These are former Volkssturm members, the people's militia that in the war's final months the Nazis drove into everyone who could hold a rifle, from 14-year-old boys to 70-year-old men. Now they wait to be sent to POW camps or distributed to temporary accommodation points. Among them stands Klaus Becker in a thin jacket, chilled, hungry, awaiting his fate. Next to him stand similar boys, some older, some younger. All silent, all afraid. An American soldier approaches the group of prisoners. A young guy, maybe 5 or 6 years older than Klaus. He's wearing a new uniform, polished boots, helmet. He's carrying something in his hands. Klaus tenses, preparing for the worst. Now it will begin. Now they'll learn what American cruelty is, what propaganda talks so much about. The American stops in front of the group and takes out chocolate bars, ordinary army Hershey's. He silently begins distributing them to the German boys. 1 bar, 2nd, 3rd. He walks along the row, extending chocolate to each one. No words, no conditions, just extends his hand with the chocolate and waits for the boy to take it. Klaus looks at the bar in his hand and can't believe it. He looks at the American who continues distributing chocolate to the others. He sees this soldier's face, an ordinary, tired face of a young guy who probably also wants to go home, to his mother, to his life. No hatred in that face. No cruelty, just simple human kindness. And in this moment something breaks in Klaus's head. The entire structure of lies that Nazi propaganda built for years collapses from one simple gesture. This person, an American, an enemy, someone he was taught to hate, just showed more humanity than he'd seen in recent months from his own commanders. They didn't torture him. They didn't humiliate him. They didn't shoot him. They gave him chocolate. Later Klaus recalled this was the most important moment in his life. Not Germany's capitulation, not the war's end, not returning home, but precisely this moment, when the American soldier extended him a chocolate bar. Because in this moment he understood a very simple but fundamental thing: everything they told him was a lie. Klaus realized, if they lied about this, they lied about everything. About the war's causes, about who was right, about what they were fighting for. The entire narrative, the entire ideology, the entire value system he grew up in, all of it was built on lies. And this lie was so comprehensive, so total, that it took just one small gesture of kindness for the entire structure to collapse. Friends, subscribe to the channel and see you next time.